Hello, and thanks for joining us at the final day of the Greenlight Guru True Quality Virtual Summit. I hope you've had the chance to enjoy the last few days of learning actionable tips, trends, and best practices to achieve true quality for your medical devices and business. This session is on responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, scaling up operations when it matters most. My name is Wade Schrader, medical device guru here at Greenlight Guru, and I will be your moderator for this special session. I know our speaker, Dan Purvis, is really looking forward to sharing what his team has learned battling the COVID-19 pandemic through Project V, a collaborative effort with Ventec Life Systems and General Motors to manufacture ventilators. Before we dive too deep into today's presentation and introduce our speaker and his company, Velentium, I'm going to touch on a few items real quick. First, this session is going to run for about 45 minutes in total, and will include a Q&A session at the end where Dan has been kind enough to answer your questions. So I encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation as they come up in the box on the right-hand side, and we will get to as many of them as time permits. This session will be recorded. Once this session wraps up, there is a 10-minute break before the next live session begins. If you're interested in learning about lessons learned from the race to supply the market with respirators, masks, and other PPE, make sure you're registered for the next session and use your unique link to tune in. If you aren't already signed up, you can register at virtual-summit.greenlight.guru. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on this free virtual summit. If you've been on one of our training sessions before, then you know we put on these because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru. Likely a similar mission as many of you on today's summit. Anything we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker and with less risk aligns with that mission. We're constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether that's through hosting free events and training sessions, through partnering with worldwide medical device consultants, or through our award-winning medical device QMS software. If you'd like to learn more about why medical device companies from across the globe are moving away from paper-based general purpose quality management systems and adopting our purpose-built medical device quality management software, I encourage you to head over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation to schedule your free personalized one-on-one demo. Now, on to the bulk of today's presentation. Let me give a proper introduction to today's presenter. Dan is CEO and co-founder of Velentium, a professional engineering firm specializing in the design and manufacture of therapeutic and diagnostic active medical devices. He passionately leads the company's culture development with a strong emphasis on making positive difference in not just patients' lives, but the company's employees. He followed up his bachelor's in electrical engineering from Texas A&M with an MBA from Rice University. Throughout his career, Dan has obtained over 20 years of experience in software, electronics, and medical devices. Dan has always been passionate about people who are the source of his motivation. Professional success allows Dan to bless his family, close friends, and now his employees. He wants to be able to not only provide financial benefits to Velentium's workers, but consistently give them the opportunity to work on meaningful and challenging projects. In turn, this gives Velentium the ability to release medical devices to market that will benefit people all over the world. So, without further ado, let me hand it over to your presenter, Dan Purvis.
Thanks, Wade. Great time. Super excited to be here with you all today and tell you what has been the most remarkable story in my career. And so the opportunity that we had with Ventec Life Systems and General Motors started 5 years ago when we began to serve Ventec Life Systems, a startup company at the time, with test system builds. We would build fully validated test systems that would allow them to assure that the components and then the final ventilator were working. And so we had a long-term relationship with Ventec. And then this Forbes article that you see on the slide came out. We read it on March the 14th. So Saturday, March 14th, my co-founder, Tim Carroll, read this Forbes article where Chris Keipel, the CEO of Ventec, is saying, if we had more resources, we could build more ventilators. And So being a good partner, we sent an email to Chris Keipel and said, how can we help? And he introduced us to their COO at the time. And we had a call scheduled for Wednesday, the 18th with Ventec. Essentially, we called them and had a conversation, and it became very obvious that they would benefit from having us involved on a regular basis in person there in Bothell, Washington. And so we actually were in our quarterly offsite at the time, and we don't do interruptions in our offsites. But in this case, I said, we're going to make an exception, have a call with Ventec Life Systems, see what they need. And I said, you know what, Jeff, if we were to be in your 8 a.m. meeting tomorrow morning in person, do you think that'd be helpful? And he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And so we hung up, and in our senior leadership meeting, then we had a conversation about which one of us is going to go in about 2 hours and get on a flight and head to Seattle. And so that ended up getting to be me, and I'll tell more about that in a little while. But then Thursday morning, the 19th, I was there with Ventec, and we're looking at ways that we could take their production capability from a few hundred a month to double or triple that volume. And throughout that Thursday, they said, oh, by the way, there's some guys from General Motors coming tomorrow. I said, oh, what's that about? They said, well, we're not really sure what that's about. We've had some initial talks, but they think that they might be able to help us scale. And so on March the 20th at 7 a.m., General Motors arrived at Ventec, and I had the opportunity to be in that room. And they did introductions. They came around to me, and I said, I'm Dan from Velentium, and we do the test systems. And so from that moment on, within the first 90 minutes, there was a conference call going with General Motors and 80 of their purchasers buying parts from around the world, because the goal was to take hundreds a month at Ventec into thousands of month at Kokomo, Indiana. It wasn't selected as the plant yet, but over those next few days, it got really, really crazy in a hurry. And I want to tell you that story. So let's go into the next slide here. We were all very intense at this point, because if you go back to that point in time, day zero, March the 20th, there's an arrow there for where we were on the curve. You see that not only was the United States rapidly seeing cases faster than almost any other country in the world, but a couple of days before, the slope on that line had increased even more. There was absolutely no flatlining. And we were all terrified that there was going to be a moment down the road where there's one ventilator left, and your mom or my mom are the last people available. They both have COVID, and one of them is going to get a ventilator, and the other one's not going to make it. And I just found myself going, that cannot happen. That cannot happen. If I have a chance to put my company in the fray and put a stop to that so that there's never a your mom or mine type of moment, we have to do that. And so that was day zero, and it began to progress rapidly from there. Day four, as we looked at the plant, essentially the numbers decide. So you look at what's going on in Seattle with Ventec in Bothell, Washington, just outside of there, and then you look at the sheer number of ventilators that the new plant needs to put out, and the numbers just speak to how many test systems were going to be necessary. Once again, on this project, my company built what ended up being 141 test stands in 3.5 weeks. And it's about 7 months worth of work. And so we'll talk about how to scale up in the slides to follow. But the only way that we were not going to be the bottleneck, because the problem is as the parts arrive at a factory to build ventilators, you don't have to be ready for those ventilators until all the parts arrive. But as soon as you build your first part, you want to hand it off to a test stand. And so that test stand not only has to be built ahead of the parts, it has to be fully installed with an installation qualification, an operation qualification, and then a performance qualification to fully validate that test stand at the new factory before the first part gets down the line. And so we stood a really big chance of being the bottleneck if we weren't careful. And so from day one, Saturday, right after I met General Motors, we started ordering parts. We were ordering parts at risk, and I'd like to speak a little bit to our culture about that. We exist at Velentium to change lives for a better world. It's our passion. It's why we exist, and it's really, really important to us. If I asked each and every one of you, let's say you're interviewing at our company, and I asked each and every one of you why you exist, what is your thing, what gets you up in the morning? We do that when we're interviewing people, and I've never, ever had anybody answer air. They don't exist for air, and I don't exist for air, and yet you and I both would be dead in 6 minutes without it, right? So it's clear that air is not our thing. For me, it's my family and the Astros when they start playing again, and all kinds of different things that give me excitement and passion in life. And for you, it's your things, but it's not air. And yet, oftentimes with companies, we say that companies exist for profit or for cash, and I just think that's wrong. I think that companies exist on profit and cash, just like we exist on air. And 6 months without profit, and we might be gone too, right? But no, we don't exist for that. We exist on that. And so, what do we exist for? At Velentium, we exist to change lives for a better world. And so, here we had an opportunity to step into the fray and truly change lives. But if I wasn't going to be the bottleneck, we had to be ordering parts from day one. And so, we were sending orders out long before we received a purchase order, and we bet the company on it. It was kind of terrifying at the time, but between my co-founder Tim Carroll and I, we decided it's what we have to do. So day 13, still working up to the overall story, and then we'll get into some lessons that we learned through the process. I got a call from one of the General Motors leaders on the project, and he was in the process of briefing the White House on a regular basis. And when I say regular, I think it was at least once a day and maybe 2 or 3 times a day in the middle of this fray. And he called me and he said, Dan, what are we going to do here? And I said, well, tell me more. What do you mean? What are we going to do here? Well, I don't see the test systems arriving yet, and that's a real problem. And I said, yes, I hear you. And we're ordering parts from the moment we heard about this project. The day after I met you, we started ordering parts, and we're desperately trying to get them in as quickly as we possibly can. In fact, we were flying people around the country on a regular basis where overnight delivery was not going to be fast enough. Not because overnight isn't fast, but because I couldn't afford for our suppliers to have a 7 p.m. deadline. I needed them to have a 5:30 a.m. deadline where they would deliver parts to an airport hotel where I had a courier waiting. They would get the parts from the front desk and get on the 7 a.m. flight back to Houston. And so it gave our suppliers all night long to continue to work on things. So we were doing everything we possibly could to come up with those parts as quickly as we possibly could. And the question was, but when I get a question from the White House of why we're not progressing any faster, and I tell them it's the test systems, and they say, who is that? And I say Velentium. Well, then what, Dan? Then what? And we were quiet on the phone for a second, and I said, well, sir, I guess tell him to call me. And I was like, oh my word, what if that happens? I did not get a call from the White House, and we did actually end up getting to deliver. We shipped our first system to Kokomo, Indiana, 4 days after we received our purchase order because we had ordered ahead of time and been working ahead of time. It was truly a remarkable time. Anytime we got the question from General Motors or Ventec to move things faster, I understood why. I understood why, because I didn't want that my mom or your moment to hit. And so, just another crazy thing that happened with that schedule. We did eventually get 141 test stands delivered, and I'd like to talk to you now about several different ways that I think I think it's the underlying 5 items that made this ramp up possible. And so let's talk about it. And first of all, I mean, many of you haven't heard of Velentium, and you've been appraised of this story because it's been in the national media for quite some time. Why haven't you heard about Velentium? Well, there were a couple of reasons. First of all, uh, we had the opportunity to step into the game. And when someone says, I'd like you to step up to the plate and swing the bat, when it's a moment like this, you want to do that, right? But I didn't want to announce our name until that ball was well into the stands. And so, not when I was called into the game, not when I stepped up to the plate, not even when I swung the bat, but when our organization launched that ball and it was going into the stands, now it's time to start to talk about who we are, what we've done, and the way that we got to play a part, because it was an amazing, amazing opportunity. So 5 aspects of ramping quickly. The first is that the ability to ramp quickly in a crisis environment does not start at that crisis. For Tim and myself, it started 8 years prior. 8 years prior, when we founded the company in 2012, and we said, first and foremost, this is going to be a company that is centered on a culture. And when I say it's centered on a culture, that means the why, which I talked about already, changing lives for a better world, the how, our values, the who, uh, tied into our name, the where we're headed, and finally, the what we do. And what we do in medical device design, development, and manufacturing is the fifth thing on the list of our culture, not the first four. And yet, when you ask a company about what makes them tick, many companies will start with what they do. For us, that's always fifth. And the reason that it's fifth is technology and marketplaces will change, but our company exists to be around and to thrive for the long haul. And so I wanted our company built on the four aspects of culture: the why, the how, the who, and the where that would lead us into the what, regardless of what that what was. So let's talk just briefly about the Velentium culture, why we exist to change lives for a better world. And I said over and over again that that starts with your family. We exist to change lives for a better world, and that starts with your family. I've got four young kids. They're not so young anymore: 14, 13, 11, and 9. And their mom is my favorite person. 22 years of marriage. There is deep family roots in my life, and I want it to be that way in all of our staff's life. Now, family for you may be you and your parakeet, or you and your dog, or whatever it is. That's fine. Your story is your story, but we embrace that story here at Velentium. And so that's our why. We exist to change lives for a better world. It starts with the families of our staff, it moves to our suppliers and our clients, and ultimately it goes all the way to a patient whose life is changed with the device that we got to play a part in. The how of Velentium is our values. I sat with Tim and another leader, and we sat down around our company, and we said, and I had a whiteboard. I said, give me the names of all the rock stars in your life. Tell me about everybody that you respect. It could be a historical figure, it could be a colleague, it could be a neighbor, a family member, a friend, a fictional character. I don't care. Just give me names. And then we went alongside of that, and I said, now tell me why. Tell me why that name is on the board. And we put all those names on the board, and then all those reasons on the board, and I erased all the names, and we had a board full of traits. And through a series of animated meetings, we got that all the way down to 3 by playing kill, keep, and combine. And it was pretty hard to get all that list all the way down to 3, but we did it, and we got down to honorable. We do right for right's sake. Results plus plus. We do the job and then some. And humble charisma. Humble charisma. We strive to be the kind of people that you want to be around. And it was the passion and the values that are the bedrock of our company that were built from 2012 over 7 to 8 years that allowed us to have a framework by which to ramp quickly. The third aspect is the who of Velentium, and the who is baked into our name. Velentium is velocity, momentum, and ingenium is the Latin word for talent. And so we strive to find people that are really, really smart. I like to say that I always hire people smarter than me, and that's not as difficult as I would like. But the bottom line is we find people who are really smart that can do work quickly, but they enjoy speed as well. They can't just do good work quickly. They have to enjoy speed, and that's the who. The where is where we're headed as a company. We dream of a day that we would have 1,000 families on staff, and I don't say 1,000 staff because we really do care about the family. And that finally leads to the what of Velentium. And we identified 9 key areas in medical device development: human factors, cybersecurity, test systems, electrical, firmware, mobile, cloud, mechanical, and then the systems engineering that ties all that together. And so the what of Velentium is that you could partner with us and we would do end-to-end device development and manufacturing in a way that can get your device into the hands or into the body of a patient and change their world forever. Right before COVID-19 hit in mid-February, we had a bed build. You say, what's a bed build? And I didn't know what a bed build was either until we started to research a way to just give back to our community. We found a group called Sleep in Heavenly Peace. Sleep in Heavenly Peace is based in Portland, Oregon, and their mission is that nobody sleeps on the floor in their town. And they have franchised out as a nonprofit across the country. And so we found the chapter here in Houston, made a donation, and they showed up on a Saturday in February with all of the lumber and the know-how. We showed up with all of the interest in the labor. And for a couple, I guess about 3 or 4 hours, we built 60 beds, 60 bunk beds from scratch. You start with raw lumber and turn it into the bunk beds. But the fun part about this organization is then they've got Single parents usually that have said, hey, my kid is sleeping on the floor. My kid is sleeping on a couch. My kid is sleeping in the bed with me. And man, they would love to have a bunk bed. And we had the opportunity that Saturday in February to drive around town with these bunk beds we had just built and go install them in children's rooms, put the mattress on that bed, put the linens on that bed, make that bed, and have that child for the first time in their life, most times, jump on their very own spot. And you see pictures of that in picture 3. It was just unbelievably exciting. And this is all about a month before COVID struck. We had no idea that this was going to happen in the months to come, but we were building into our culture in these moments. The 4th picture is one of my favorites from that day. We had a banner that everybody got to sign that was there, and there's little Emily carefully writing out her name, E-M-I, and she's got a permanent marker and she's being real careful. But the look on the face of her dad, our staff member, is priceless, because you see in Matt a deep, deep thrill that he got to do something meaningful with his daughter, and our company got to make that possible. And so invest in your culture, because then you have to step into a fray, like we had to step into a fray, I had no doubt in my mind that I had an entire company behind me. The second aspect of ramping quickly is commitment. That day on the 18th, where we had just had the call with Ventec Life Systems, we hung up the phone, and then Tim and I had a mini fight about who is going to get to go. And I ultimately won because Tim was more familiar with some of the other projects that we had running at the time, so he could run those projects and I could run Ventec. And so I was the one that, quote unquote, got to go. So I stepped out of my bedroom office here and I said, hey, Julie, we need to go take a walk. And we started walking down the street that we live on, mostly in silence. And I said, I'm about to go get on a plane. Now, you remember the my mom or your slide from earlier with that ramp that had not begun to flatten. Uh, there was a lot of fear, even now, but especially in that time where we had not seen things begin to flatten. And if you remember the hot zone for America, the first deaths from COVID in America were in the Seattle area, 9 miles from Bothell, Washington, where I was about to get on a plane and head to. And it was a very silent walk that day. And I just looked over at Julie and I said, babe, you know, I have to do this. And she looked at me and she knew. And so we headed back to the house and I packed, and she was quietly weeping in our kitchen. We have a little area where we drink coffee and talk often. And I just kissed her on the top of the head and walked out the door. But the commitment that Tim and I led with was followed up time and time again by an entire ecosystem of people. And we'll get into that in the coming slides. But I had no doubt that we were going to be followed into that fray by our staff because of the way we had sowed the seeds of culture for the last 8 years. As we looked at commitment, we had a leadership team on this project because, once again, we were doing 7 months worth of work in about 3.5 weeks. And I told each and every one of them, you have heard time and time again that we exist to change lives for a better world, and that starts with your family. Uh, but it doesn't. It doesn't right now, because the entire country has just stepped in front of your family. And so we exist to change lives for a better world. That starts with your family, except for now. And right now, I need 16 to 18 hours a day from you every day until it's done. Every day until it's done. Your body will eventually quit on you, and that's fine. Go home and sleep, get rested, and come back the next day, and we'll go again. But you can't lead with just that amount of commitment. That's still not enough. If you're going to lead on this project, not only do I need 16 to 18 hours a day every day until it's done, but I need you to be willing to expect that out of everyone that works underneath you. And if you can expect that of yourself and everyone else that works underneath you, you can lead on this team. If not, you're welcome to be on the team, but you can't lead. And all the leaders stepped up, no problem. It was exciting to see them step up. But that was the level of commitment that we were unapologetic about. And the reason we were unapologetic about it is because our culture demanded that we step into this fray. So now we have a base, right? I've got a base of culture and I've got a base of commitment. But now I need just a ton of bodies. And we've got to do 3.5, we got to do 7 months worth of work in 3.5 weeks. In fact, when we got that purchase order from General Motors, our test counterpart at General Motors was asked by General Motors purchasing, who else could do this? because maybe we should bid this out. This is a big number here. I mean, are we sure that Velentium is the company? And my counterpart there, his name was Chris. He said, I could give you 30 names of people that could do this. And he was telling me this story later, and I was like, wait, what? Come on, Chris. And he goes, no, I said there were 30 other companies that could do this, and I could give you those names. Give me a month to write the spec, and give them 6 to 7 months to do the work. It'll be done, no problem. But if you want this done in 3.5 weeks, the only company that can is the company that's been doing it for 5 years. We knew that. They knew that. We got the order. But it's one thing to know how to do it. It's another thing to execute at this amount of scale at that amount of speed. And so over the next several days, we doubled the size of our company. Our 47-person company added over 50 more people. We interviewed and interviewed and interviewed. It was kind of serendipitous that it turned out that the company that could do these test systems, namely Velentium, was based in Houston, Texas, which the oil industry was really hit hard through this COVID time. So there were a lot of good people available. And so we had lots of people that we could choose from. And there were some that would ask the question, well, what's the rate? And if that was one of the first questions they asked, we just passed and moved on. It didn't mean we didn't want to pay our contractors well, and we did pay them well. But if their first question was about money, that was not the right kind of question for what we were about to embark on. We wanted people who, when they heard about what we were doing, they said, I have to do that. I have to be involved in that, because that's the same thing that we had across our entire company. And so as we added those 50 people, they were 50 have to do that people. And then we'd talk about money and take care of them. But it was amazing to see the staff, both through direct contractors and then also 2 other companies, More Controls and Oasis Testing, that we added as subcontractors. We had over 50 new people in that time. But then not only was it was it necessary to add those people, it was also necessary to add other companies. And so throughout this entire time, we had to continue to get more and more companies involved, because we had over 1,500 different parts in these test systems. When I say there were 141 test stands, there were 21 different types of test stand. 16 in the plant there in Kokomo, and another 5 that went over to China for circuit testing. That's the connection from the ventilator to the patient. And so 16 different types of test stands. We had to have people that we added for purchasing. We had to have people that we added for building. We had to have people that we added for receiving. And we even added some engineers on the design side. Not every one of those test stands was fully designed with a design package. Some of them had, there was a week there in Seattle where I spent every night after the Ventec manufacturing team would leave, I would get into test stands with video and pictures, making sure we had every last detail. We had a Google Sheet at the time that I'll tell you more about in the future, but that Google Sheet had as many as 50 people in the sheet at once, all working on different aspects of that sheet. So a quick shout out to several different vendors that helped us in unbelievable ways through this process. The first one I think would be McMaster-Carr. McMaster-Carr, their average price per part is fairly low because they make fittings and tubing and such. And yet their number of parts in our test systems was higher than anybody else by far. They set up a daily same-day delivery from their warehouse in Chicago to the Kokomo, Indiana plant, bringing us stuff in hours of when we needed it. Alleycat is the company out of Arizona that makes flow meters, pressure meters, flow controllers, pressure controllers. There were tons of high precision flow meters and pressure controllers in the system. They had their machinists working overnight to hit times where I had a courier waiting for them to give us a key part. National Instruments builds some of their parts over in Hungary and Eastern Europe. They were turning orders for parts with a dedicated expediting team from Hungary to our shop in Houston in less than 3 days. Not only that, but National Instruments took their purchasing team at my request and started hunting for parts that weren't National Instruments parts on behalf of this project. The guys at Menser and the people at Heiss, both pressure sensor companies. The pressure sensors they both made for us are fairly long lead items because it takes so long to calibrate them, but we worked at the highest levels with those companies to make that happen. And I think I would say that that the way that that happened so quickly at a high level with those different suppliers was that we used LinkedIn at times to get to the senior leadership of these companies. And ultimately, we said, look, we've got an executive order for the president of the United States who has ordered General Motors and Ventec to do this thing. They can't build these ventilators without these test systems, and these test systems need your parts. And it was really thrilling to get to know my counterpart at the highest levels of our suppliers, because ultimately we saw it again and again that when you ask the American people to step into the fray and make a dent in something that could be even more of a crisis situation than it already is, we all want to help. And it was people like you, it was people like the people at these suppliers that made that happen. And then a quick shout out on the logistics side to UPS. We had some really crazy times with UPS. I got to meet the president of UPS Texas, and then we knew the head of the Houston division, and he actually, the head of the Houston division, came out with his 9-year-old son on a Sunday. I think he was trying to check and make sure we were the real deal, but he found just a building full of people working at a feverish pace. And he told Tim, he said, you know what? From now on, you're going to get a truck all to yourself out of our Stafford distribution center every morning at 7:30. And so for the rest of the time, the 10 or 10:30 delivery that is standard with UPS showed up at 7 or 7:30 for us. And those 2.5 hours every day, they really mattered. We had another story with UPS where we knew the final cutoff was 9 p.m. in Houston, Texas. That at Intercontinental Airport, if you show up at 9 p.m., there's still a way for an overnight delivery to happen. We had one time where that 9 p.m. got slid to 9:12 p.m. and our driver, which turned out at that point to be my wife Julie, drove onto the tarmac at Intercontinental Airport and the crate out of the back of our expedition into their final airline shipper that went then onto the plane and out the door. They held it an extra 12 minutes and made it work. So a shout out to you all at UPS. You did some great things for us as well. But the key was that the collective team reached into the thousands. And it was that team that was going to make it possible for every ventilator that came out of that Kokomo, Indiana plant to be certified according to the test systems that were necessary. Hyperspeed team building, aspect number 3. Number 4, connecting rhythms and human moments. We would meet every morning at 8:30 with the team and just talk about here's what the day is going to entail. But the other meeting that I thought was very important was every afternoon at 5:30. Normally that's the end of the day. In this case, it was just the middle of the day because we would go on till 10:30 or 11 every night. But in that evening meeting or afternoon meeting with the 4 leaders on this project, I would start every one of them with what I called a human moment. Tell me a human moment where your story as a human being supersedes your story as just an output producer. That could be a story of you taking a moment to eat lunch with your son. It could be a story where you lost your temper and screamed at somebody on the phone. That's not a good human moment, but it still proves we're human. And that was a really key time through this ramp up, is that it was important for me that all of our leaders continued to push across the entire team this idea that we're humans first. Because I got news for you. It got really, really exhausting and dicey and pressure filled as we're standing in the gap for the entire country to get these ventilators out the door. It's important that we remember that we're all going at this for the same reasons. And so, in the midst of the exhaustion and the pressure and the deadlines, remember that we're human beings first. And then the final one was, I wanted to say lather, rinse, and repeat, or regular review and revision. When you're moving this quickly, you have to remember that what you thought might work is just not going to work. And so we would change things up on a regular basis. I talked about what we fondly call the multi-bomb, essentially the multi-bill of materials. It was a Google sheet that had over 16 different tabs in it. And like I said, there were 50 people at once in that same spreadsheet online. There were engineers that were adding new parts to the multi-bomb. Why were they adding new parts when we were just replicating systems? There were times that the part that was in the existing system was not available or not available within a few days, which it had to be on this project. So there are engineers adding new line items. There are purchasers purchasing those line items. There are receivers that are then receiving the parts into our facility off of those line items. And it was over and over again, we would have to retool that spreadsheet, get it a little bit better, a little bit quicker, a little bit more efficient. It was just one of the many stories of ways that we had to continue over and over again to retool throughout the process. And that 5:30 leader meeting was key for that. What's working? What's not? How can we change it? And a lot of times that 5:30 meeting led to then 5, 6 hours into the wee hours of the morning where we would retool so that when we got together with the team at 8:30 the next morning, we were ready to go all over again. All right, some key lessons that I would take away from this. The first one I would say, and this is kind of on the funny side, to make sure that on that multi-bomb, if you ever create one, that you put the unit of measure. Because when it says I need 3 tubing sets, what they're trying to say as an engineer is they need 3 feet of tubing. It turns out the tubing in that particular case was sold 1,000 feet at a time. And so now instead of 1,000 feet, which is the minimum order, we had 3,000 feet of tubing because it said that we needed 3, and we didn't take the time to figure out 3 what. But no, lots of other lessons that maybe not quite so humorous. One is that in the event of global pandemic and crisis, still, despite all of that intensity, some people get it and some people don't. Uh, in the event that you find yourself in a crisis moment, if you come across somebody who just doesn't get it, don't try to convince them. It's not worth the time. Move on and find somebody who does get it. I had one moment where I actually lost it and just started screaming. Not my proudest moment. I was talking to a credit card company, and we had hit our line of credit limit. We had hit our credit card limits. We were buying our personal credit cards at this point before we got our first payment from the project. And so I called a credit card company and I said, I need you to expand my limit. And here's why. I'm operating under executive order from the president to Ventec Life Systems and General Motors. We are building the plant that will build the ventilators that will save your mom or mine. And what I got back was, yes, you'll need to submit your bank statements and you'll need to submit your financial records. I was like, hang on. No bank statements, no financial records. I need more limit and I need it now. Well, sir, I can't do that. We can't do that. I was like, no, hang on. Someone in your company can. And I know you don't know who that person is, but I need you to connect me to somebody else who can make that call or be a little bit closer to that call. And the lady on the phone just was like, well, sir, I just need your bank statements. And then I was like, no, you don't need my bank statements. I need you to understand we're trying to save your life. Click, and I hung up. Not my favorite moment. But the bottom line was that that person just didn't get it, and they didn't have the vision to try to put me in touch with someone who could make that call. Other people did get it. We had a critical part one night in the Kokomo plant that was broken, and we needed to retool a test system, and it was one of the quantity 24 test systems. So currently 24 test systems were down because we needed this part, and it was just a simple piece of tubing that I could get at Lowe's, except Lowe's was closed. Kokomo Lowe's was not open at the time, uh, but I called them and I said, and I got somebody to answer the phone. I said, I know you're closed, but here's what's going on. We're around the corner and we're trying to save the world. Uh, can you help me? And the manager said, no problem. Meet me at the front door. And he reopened the Lowe's. And I went to the plumbing section and we bought all kinds of different parts because we weren't sure which part was going to be necessary. And I came back with just a huge bag full of simple, less than $1 parts, and we figured out which one worked and we put it in the 24 test systems and kept rolling. That manager at Lowe's got it. He understood. Some people get it and some people don't. Don't take no is another lesson that I learned. Don't take no for an answer. So we had all kinds of times where a supplier needed more time past the 7 o'clock cutoff for overnight shipment or past the 9 o'clock cutoff for overnight shipment. And so we sent couriers all over the country. One of those times, we didn't even have time for an overnight shipment. We sent a courier to Detroit, and then we had our supplier buy a ticket so they could get behind security and hand the parts to that courier so he could then board another flight back to Houston. His layover in Detroit was less than an hour. But he was flying Delta, and they did a great job for us, but there were weather delays going into Atlanta. And so his connecting flight from Houston to Atlanta, then Atlanta to Detroit was going to make him too late to return from Detroit to Houston on the direct flight back. So we called Delta and we said, hey, here's what we're doing. We're trying to change the world. We're trying to save the world so that your mom or mine, right? I would say that over and over again. Doesn't have to have that decision made for them. And it was an amazing time. Our courier got off the plane in Atlanta, and there was a person sitting there with a sign in the jetway with his name. And he was like, yeah, that's me. And they walked down the jetway onto the tarmac into a luxury SUV that drove him over to the other plane and back up the stairs into the jetway and into a first class seat that they upgraded him into, so he can make that connection to Detroit, so he could fly back to Houston to get us the parts that we needed. And Delta Airlines got it. So shout out to them. Some people get it, some people don't, but don't take no. Tim had to network into the right levels of Delta Airlines while our courier was in the air to make that happen. And then the last one I'll leave you with here in our final moments is exude grace. Show tolerance under pressure. When you are in that vice grip and you're just an egg and you're starting to crack like you see on the slide, understand that the person that's driving you nuts is under that same pressure, is just as sleep deprived. And we found that again and again, as we would focus on that, of like, hey, be cool with each other, be cool with each other, um, that it was really, really helpful, because ultimately we're all just Americans trying to make a dent in this crazy virus, to save the world. And that's the beauty of what happened. That whether you're calling in from somewhere else in the world or you're calling in from here in the United States, that human beings, when given grand challenges and then given the tools and the ability to step into that grand challenge and make a difference, this was the feel good story of a lifetime for me. I am terrified at some of the stats that you see about the worldwide pandemic, and I'm dismayed at some of the deaths that have happened, at all of the deaths that have happened. But I got news for you. It has been a high privilege for our company to step in on behalf of all of you and behalf of all of the world to try to have a situation now that if there's ever a ramp up in this pandemic again, that you know that there's a place in Kokomo, Indiana, where 10,000 ventilators a month could come out of. And that's what we all led to, is this moment. You see that box, and every time I look at that box, I get chills, because that's the box that housed the very first ventilator that came out of a plant that had been shuttered for over 7 years in less than 4 weeks. In 28 days, from the first time I met those people at General Motors and the first time General Motors met Ventec Life Systems in person, to that moment when that box went out the door to Chicago, where it was put on a patient and saved their life. We wrote on the top of that box that we were thrilled to partner with you being the doctors and the surgeons, to change lives for a better world. So thanks for taking the time. I think we may have a few questions.
Yes, thank you, Dan. Very, very inspiring, the story you shared with us there. I know I'm not speaking just for myself as well. We've in the Q&A session, there's more compliments than there are questions. So
Man, that's fun.
very inspiring, and just to say a couple from those compliments, the grit that your team showed is just impressive and very inspiring, and the culture that you guys have there is really impressive. Seems like a great thing that you've done there, and something that great that you guys have going. So we do have one question though,
Oh, great.
and
Yeah.
it's with records.
Mhm.
So with ramping up quickly, how did you guys handle all the documentation and records that came with it, and even specifically like the Google Sheets instance? How did you handle that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it actually leads me to a quote that I got from the founder of Ventec, which was terrifyingly real. He said, in a year, we're all going to be heroes, dead, or in prison. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then he just walked away, and I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. Because heroes, yes, 10,000 ventilators a month, saving lives. Dead, yes, it doesn't work. The curve doesn't flatten, and man, this goes really, really bad for our entire society. Or in prison, uh, the FDA allowed fast tracking of the devices, but they also said, I mean, but as engineers, we all knew we had to be careful. And so you don't want to cut one too many corners. Throughout this entire thing, we had formal IQ, OQ, PQ, and formal records retention. And so fully validated, full traceability, full calibration. For every one or two developers and technicians, we probably had another person going along with the paper trail to make sure that we were dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's. Excellent question. it was necessary to keep our eye on the quality ball for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's impressive that you could keep all that together too, while you were ramping up so quickly. So, yep, looks like we're running low on time here. So, just wanted to thank you again, Dan, for sharing this. I know we've gotten a couple questions about whether this is recorded or not because they want to share it with their team. So,
Oh, that's
just
great.
wanted to say, yes, this is being recorded and it will be made available to you um, shortly after this, by the end of the day today, or by the end of the week at least. So, yeah, everyone will be able to access that recording.
Thanks for taking the time to hear our story. It's been the highlight of my 26-year career.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. It is incredible. And the comments just keep coming in about people being inspired. So yeah, thank you again. And I did want to point out too, as a reminder to everyone that's attending, that our next session is starting in 10 minutes. So if you're interested in learning the lessons learned from the race to supply the market with respirators, masks, and other PPE, um, feel free to use your unique link to tune in. And if you haven't signed up already, you can register for that at virtual-summit.greenlight.guru.
Go
Um,
change lives and make it a better world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again, Dan. And thank you for those closing words. Thank you to everyone for joining, and take care.